This is Descr's Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Descr. This is flyer number 416, entitled The Masculist Volcano. Description. This flyer claims that a masculist volcano is about to erupt as men become conscious that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, with their financial parasitism, their female manslavery, etc. So become strongly intolerant of monoconscious feminists who claim the opposite, due to their monoconscious ignorance of how women oppress men. When this masculist volcano erupts, monoconscious fluffy feminists will be destroyed, and fluffies will be left rotting on the shelf, since within a decade or so, nearly every man on the planet will have been influenced by masculist ideas, and will thus have learned to hate fluffy manslaving parasites, and to hate even more the fluffy feminist hypocrites, destroying them, forcing women to fip up and to become biconscious, or face the volcanic wrath of the masculists. The flyer itself. The Masculist Volcano by Prof. Dr. Hugo Descr. Email profhugodescr@yahoo.com. Website profhugodescr.wordpress.com. This flyer claims that men are about to explode in a volcano of rage at the level of manslavery by women. To have one's masculinist consciousness raised means essentially to see fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery. In brackets, a fluffie, based on the word fluff, is a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man. Fluffies are the arch enemies of the masculists, hated by them as much as the abolitionists in the 19th century in the northern states of the US hated the slavers of Negroes in the southern states, and who eventually went to war, the US Civil War, over the Negro slavery issue. Since manslavery is something to be hated, masculists have a hatred of fluffies and fluffy feminists. In brackets, a fluffy feminist is a feminist who still has traditional fluffy attitudes towards men, that is, seeing men as cash machines who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Masculists hate fluffies for their parasitism of the money and labour of men. Masculists hate fluffy feminists even more, since it's bad enough that fluffy feminists are fluffies and hence parasite off the money and labour of men for decades. They are also hypocrites, since they want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men in the divorce courts, expecting to behave as fluffy parasites of their ex-husbands by not bothering to fip up, in brackets, become FIPS, equals financially independent persons, close brackets, by getting a career competent education at high school and college, thus expecting in her 30s, when her biological clock is ticking hard, and realizing that her fluffy crap diploma does not allow her to earn enough money to buy her own middle-class house, so she looks around for some gullible manslave to parasite off, fluffy style, expecting him to pay for the middle-class house that she raises her kids in. A decade later, she will be bored with her 41st penis husband. In brackets, research shows that the average Western young woman, under the influence of feminism and the pill, has had some 40 different penises in her by the time she is in her 30s. She will then take him to the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court system and have him financially massacred by causing him to lose custody of his kids with 90% probability, lose his house to her so that she can continue to raise her kids in it, lose half his stuff and half of his wealth to her, be forced to pay for his kids that he will barely see, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffie, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life. This is such a massive gender injustice against men that it's only a question of time, probably only a few years from the time of writing this Masculist flyer, that's March 2021, before there will be such an explosion of rage and hatred by millions of men that women will feel as though men have exploded, turned into a veritable volcano, a masculist volcano. Millions of men are now being influenced by masculist ideas that are spreading across the world thanks to the internet, so that individual masculists are able to spread their ideas written in their living rooms and distribute across the planet, waking up millions of men so that they do not have to pay the traditional price of being man-slaves to women, working for women, in order to get a bit of sex from a woman from time to time. Masculists are teaching men that women oppress men hugely more than vice versa, despite what the feminists say. Most feminists are monoconscious, that is, they have only had their feminist consciousness raised, so they are aware how men oppress women, but not vice versa, since they know nothing about masculism. They have not been taught how women oppress men, which is the task of the masculists, that is, to teach both sexes that women oppress men far worse than vice versa. So the feminists are angry at men for the way that men oppress women. Then once millions of men have had their masculist consciousnesses raised, given that women oppress men hugely more than vice versa, then it's to be expected that men's rage at women will be hugely greater in proportion to how much greater that women oppress men than vice versa. Masculist anger at women will therefore be explosive, volcanic, to such a point that women will soon feel as though they have been hit by a bus, the masculist bus, as men rise up in real anger, hatred and venom, lashing out viciously at women, especially fluffy parasites, and even more so at fluffy feminist hypocrites for their massive gender crimes against men. As millions of men become informed of masculist ideas and masculist rhetoric, they will become intolerant of feminist anger against men, seeing men's oppression of women as small potatoes compared to women's gender oppression of men. For example, imagine some feminist haranguing a mixed crowd, that is, of both sexes, saying how horrible a thing rape is of a woman by a man. Imagine also that there are masculists in the audience who are well informed of both feminist and masculist ideas, and imagine how they will react towards such a feminist. Here is a probable dialogue between the feminist and one of the masculists, who is more articulate than the others. F, that's feminist.
Men are rapists. Men are toxic. Men cause the wars that cause so much misery for humanity. Women should be the politicians so that wars no longer occur. Men are aggressive. Men oppress women and should be punished for their gender crimes against women.
M, that's masculist, interrupting, and in an extremely angry, aggressive tone. I'm a masculist, one of several in this audience. We are here to tell you that women are hugely greater gender oppressors of men than vice versa, because women's oppression of men is continuous and lasts decades. Millions of women are manslavers, expecting men to work for them for decades. 80% of young women at the critical age of 16 in high schools do not bother to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, that's financially independent persons, by failing to get a career-competent education, then expect to parasite off the money and labour of a man for decades. When you women lash out at men for being rapists, we masculists hit back at you saying being raped is small potatoes compared to a woman who manslaves a man for decades. We masculists have a hatred for fluffies who don't bother to FIP up. We label them fluffy parasites, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be severely punished by not getting a man. We masculists spread our masculist message to the planet, especially to young men, telling them not to marry, not to have kids, since you hated fluffy feminist hypocrites have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for young men that in many countries now 2/3 of young men refuse to marry, reject paternity and spend their money on themselves. The hypocrisy of you fluffy feminists is so severe that you are hated by the masculists. You keep harping on how men oppress women, but the reverse is hugely worse. But you feminists are so monoconscious, that is, you've only had your feminist consciousness raised, so you know nothing about how women oppress men, and far worse. So when we masculists hear you feminazis constantly lashing out at how men oppress women, we get angry at your monoconscious ignorance, your monoconscious callousness towards men. This is the end of part 1.